welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. Israel has continued bombing the besieged Gaza Strip after killing at least 24 Palestinians overnight. The Palestinian Health Ministry says 9 children were among those killed, 105 have been injured in the attacks. In Jerusalem, the occupation forces have again attacked worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, injuring hundreds. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has condemned the Israeli aggression. Addressing a press conference in Islamabad, he said forcible eviction of Palestinians from Sheikh Jarrah must be stopped. The US says its Coast Guard ship fired around 30 warning shots after 13 Iranian vessels came close to American Navy ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said the 6 US military vessels were escorting the guided missile submarine Georgia. He added the Iranian vessels left after the warning shots. The US has welcomed the Taliban's announcement of a 3-day ceasefire on Eid holiday and urged them to extend it. In a statement, State Department spokesman Ned Price said Washington calls on the Taliban and Afghan leaders to engage seriously in the ongoing peace process. Meanwhile, the Taliban have released 33 soldiers from their prisons in Kabul, Uruzgan and Farah provinces. India has reported nearly 3,900 deaths from COVID-19 and almost 330,000 new infections overnight. Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered 113 fatalities and nearly 3,100 coronavirus cases in the last 24 hours. Globally, the COVID-19 has claimed more than 3.2 million lives and infected over 158 million people. Well, those were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now the news in detail. Israel has continued bombing the besieged Gaza Strip after killing at least 24 Palestinians overnight. The Palestinian Health Ministry says 9 children were among those killed, while 105 have been injured in the attacks. More in this report. Despite calls from the international community for an end to the deadly offensive against Palestinians, Israeli forces defied all norms of international law and humanity and continued assaults against Palestinians across the occupied territories. Israeli security forces used stun grenades and tear gas to attack worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque compound once again. The Red Crescent says the occupation forces have injured more than 700 people so far in assaults in East Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council held an urgent meeting on the Jerusalem unrest as world leaders called for the de-escalation of tensions. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken urged all sides to take steps to de-escalate the situation.
And also, of course, concerns about the violence, provocative actions in and around the Haram al-Sharif, Temple Mount. That violence needs to cease. All sides need to de-escalate, reduce tensions, take practical steps to calm things down.
Meanwhile, European Union's chief, Joseph Borrell, has called for calm and reiterated support for two-state solution of Israel-Palestine conflict. The League of Arab States also held an urgent session of Arab foreign ministers at the request of Palestine, which was supported by a number of Arab countries. Thousands of Turks rallied outside Israeli embassy in Ankara to protest the Israeli violence.
We really a military action there rather than people making noise, because we cannot go beyond condemnation every year. Now Turkish soldiers should go there. Muslims should be united and stand up for Al-Aqsa and Gaza.
This comes as Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in phone calls with Palestinian leaders, promised to mobilize the world to stop Israeli terror. Pakistan says it is extremely concerned over Israeli aggression in East Jerusalem. Addressing a press conference, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan's stance on Palestine is very clear. The Foreign Minister said Israel committed violence over unarmed Palestinians who were praying in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. He called for the stoppage of forcible eviction in Sheikh Jarrah. Qureshi said the international community cannot neglect Israel's violence in Sheikh Jarrah. He added all the Muslim world should have a collective stance on the Israeli brutality. The U.S. says its Coast Guard ship fired around 30 warning shots after 13 Iranian vessels came close to American Navy ships in the Strait of Hormuz. This is the second time within a month that U.S. military ships fired warning shots to turn away Iranian vessels in the strait. Talking to reporters, Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said the 6 U.S. military vessels were escorting the guided missile submarine Georgia. Kirby said the Iranian vessels left after the warning shots. He said the U.S. response to what he called Iranian harassment was appropriate for the situation. Kirby added such activities could lead to a real miscalculation and does not serve anybody's interest. The U.S. has welcomed the Taliban's announcement of a 3-day ceasefire on Eid holiday and urged them to extend it. The State Department spokesperson says Washington calls on the Taliban and Afghan leaders to engage seriously in the ongoing peace process. In a briefing, spokesperson Ned Price said the U.S. condemns attack on girls' school in Kabul. Price noted despite troops' withdrawal, the U.S. is not disengaging from Afghanistan. Meanwhile, U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad also welcomed the ceasefire decision by the Taliban and Kabul. However, he called for a permanent ceasefire and urged accelerated negotiations on a political settlement. Earlier, the Taliban released 33 soldiers from their prisons in Kabul, Uruzgan and Farah provinces. India has reported nearly 3,500 deaths from COVID-19 and almost 330,000 new infections overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.2 million lives and infected over 158 million people. Details in the following report. As the coronavirus outbreak spreads into India's vast rural hinterland, dozens of bodies of people believed to have died from COVID-19 have washed up on the banks of the Ganges River. Outside the crematoriums, ambulances carrying bodies lined up as the country continues to struggle with overflowing hospitals and morgues. Doctors in India are warning against the practice of using cow dung in the belief it will ward off COVID-19. The government is under increasing pressure to impose a nationwide lockdown. However, the blanket curbs are increasing the vows of migrant workers. The Philippines and Argentina have each detected their first 2 cases of a coronavirus variant first identified in India.
I did financial work at a private company, but the current pandemic situation and lockdown forced the company to shut down. So we have no choice but to go back home in the rural area. We'll feel safe there because the situation in New Delhi is really bad, and that's the main reason for us to go back.
Kuwait has announced to bar entry for travelers from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal and Sri Lanka until further notice. Meanwhile, the European Commission is set to start a second legal case against AstraZeneca over its delayed deliveries of vaccines. As the continent's inoculation drive reaches a third of adults and COVID-19 infections ease, Europe is starting to reopen cities. England has recorded 0 daily COVID-19 deaths for the first time since July. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson set out the next phase of easing the lockdown.
But with deaths and hospitalisations at their lowest level since last July, the UK's 4 chief medical officers today agreeing a reduction in the alert level, the data now support moving to step 3 in England from next Monday, the 17th of May.
The US has authorized Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine for use in children as young as 12. In Canada, more people are lining up for shots after Alberta opened up vaccines to everyone 12 years old and older. Meanwhile, the World Trade Organization chief hoped that by December, the body's members will have reached a pragmatic solution over whether to waive COVID-19 vaccine patents. In Pakistan, 113 more people have died from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the death toll has reached 19,106. It said over 3,000 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry has so far reported over 864,000 infections and more than 786,000 recoveries. Health officials say the number of active cases is approaching 79,000. Over 4,800 of them are in critical condition. Saudi Arabia says a drone strike by the Yemen's Houthis on a border village in southern Jazan city caused damage to a house and cars. However, the Saudi Civil Defense said no injuries have been reported. Earlier, Saudi-led coalition in Yemen said it intercepted an explosive-laden boat south of the Red Sea. Coalition also said it destroyed an explosive drone that was fired at Abbas airport, but the Houthis claimed they had hit an important target at the airport. Houthis have escalated regular cross-border attacks on Saudi Arabia. Gunmen have abducted 10 people, including children and women, from a mosque in Nigeria's Katsina state. Authorities said armed gunmen had kidnapped 40 worshippers late in the night and took them to Rogu Forest. Police said they managed to free 30 hostages, while efforts to rescue remaining 10 are underway. Last week, bandits abducted dozens of travelers and killed a journalist who was trying to save a woman. Pro-democracy activists are holding protests across Myanmar to mark the 100 days since the military coup. In Yangon, people held a flash mob-style protest against the military rule. According to an activist group, the security forces have killed at least 281 civilians, including 52 children, in the crackdown on dissent so far. Meanwhile, Thailand police have arrested 3 Burmese journalists and 2 activists who fled the military ban. Police said they have been booked for illegal entry and face possible deportation. The Reporters News organization has urged the Thai authorities not to deport them due to serious danger. U.S. President Joe Biden says there is no evidence so far that Russia was involved in the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. Talking to reporters, U.S. President said there is, however, evidence that the ransomware is in Russia. Biden said that is why Moscow has some responsibility to deal with the attack. Meanwhile, the Federal Bureau of Investigation confirmed that the dark side ransomware forced the shutdown of the pipeline. Earlier, Colonial said it was moving towards a partial opening of its 8,850 kilometers of pipeline. On Friday, hackers locked down the company's IT systems, apparently demanding a significant amount of money in ransom. In Colombia, a meeting between protest leaders and President Ivan Duque has broken up without curbing the ongoing anti-government protest. Official data shows 24 people have died and over 800 injured since the start of the protest against police violence. The meeting was also attended by other government officials and representatives from the UN and the Catholic Church. Talking to media, protest leaders said the government had not shown empathy for their demands. They called for a nationwide strike on 12th of May to reinforce their demands. The government terms the talks exploratory and says it wants to reach an agreement with protesters. President Ivan Duque visited Cali after weekend violence in the city left over a dozen injured.
Hacer sujetas del pisoteo de nadie.
No one can trample on the Constitution or the law. Our responsibility is not to act with brutality, but to act within the framework of all competencies and strict adherence to the protection of human rights, so that the city has all the guarantees and to avoid confrontations between citizens, or what is even worse, citizens who try to take control by their own hands.
19 years old, Shiraz Kashif has become the youngest Pakistani to summit the world's highest peak, Mount Everest. It is his second successful attempt to scale a peak over 8,000 meters tall. The young climber has several local mountains to his name, including the Broad Peak, which he scaled at the age of 17. Kashyap climbed almost 3,900 meters tall Makra Peak at the age of 11 in 2014. His latest achievement was to summit Khusargang Peak last year. Legendary mountaineer Muhammad Ali Satpara is the only Pakistani to summit 8 out of the only 14 peaks that are over 8,000 meters tall. More news stories coming up after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Shares in the Asia Pacific declined as Wall Street retreated on worries about escalating inflation. Japan's benchmark Nikkei 225 is leading the losses, slipping more than 2%. The Shanghai Composite Index shed marginally. The Hang Seng is Hong Kong lost just above 2%. In Seoul, the Kospi dropped over 1%. Australia's ASX 200 also lost more than 1%. Now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.